Welcome to today's webinar. I'm really excited to have everyone here. So again, I'll take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Joseline Nicholas. I am a local real estate agent and a real estate investor at the same time. I started real estate investing very early in 2014. And we've been doing that for the last probably like 7 or 8 years already. And I bought my first property in Toronto. The market did very well in Toronto in those few years. We bought another one in 2016. And once we saw what will happen in those first 2 years, we just knew that real estate investing is what we wanted to do. So we took it seriously, and we started basically buying more and selling few to build a portfolio to allow my husband and myself to retire early. I remember when I met Matthew, I think it's been a few years ago, the first thing I said to him was like, I want to retire. I want to leave my job. I've heard that real estate investing, you can basically set up your portfolio such that you leave your job, and that's what I want to do. That was literally my goal. My background is economics. So I went to school for economics, McMaster University, did my master's at Laurier, and then I started working for the government of Ontario. Now, at one point, the job with the government was my dream job. But when I got in and I was there, we were buying properties along the way. And I realized that I just didn't want to be in government much longer. And that's how I came up with a new goal, which was to retire much earlier. And it's worked out for us. So I left my job in March. Now I'm working as a full-time real estate investor. Thank you. My husband left his job in July. My husband's background is construction science. He was working for engineering firms, helping them with construction. But right now, we're working together, and that was a dream for a long time. And real estate has allowed us to do that. So I'm very humbled that we can be here, Matthew, to talk about things that we've done. I know you've done a lot of interesting things. You've been investing in real estate for 30 years. Right now, you're coaching students who are looking to get started and embark on the same journey. And it is my honor today that you can be here and share your knowledge, your skill, your experience. It is truly a pleasure to have you here. Please join me to welcome Matthew to this webinar. I'm so very thankful for the time that you set aside to do this. And obviously all the effort that went into making sure that the suit fits. Thank you so much.
So it's great to be here, and I'm honored for such a warm welcome. What I'll do, I'll spend about maybe 2 or 3 minutes on my background, just to qualify where I'm coming from, and then we'll talk a bit about retirement and things that can be done for earlier retirement. So my history, I guess I bought my first house when I was 19 years old, but I was not an investor. I bought a house. My mother co-signed, my parents co-signed for me. I put all the down payment. I think it was like 50% down, because a 19-year-old back in those days, back in 1992, couldn't get a mortgage. And maybe that's the same today as well. So I needed that co-sign, even though I put down about, I think it was like 60%. And back in those days, houses were like about $86,000. So, but actually, full-grown men were making $30,000 a year. So it was a substantial amount, right? But ultimately, I bought my first property, and it was not an investment really, but it had a basement apartment, which shared a common kitchen. So I rented the basement, we had a common kitchen, and I had the main floor and upstairs. Now today, I guess you call that maybe house hacking. I think back in those days, we called it, you buy a house, you rent a basement, and you share the kitchen. So that was the strategy. But again, I was not an investor. And then 4.5 years later, 5 years later, by that time I was a teacher, like a college teacher, teaching post-secondary. And my brother came to me, he was a cop, and he said, I want you to invest because you're great at systems. And I'm like, I don't want to invest. I don't like real estate. I don't like having a tenant. Guy's a pain in the butt. I'm not going to invest. And he says, I'm your older brother. I got a gun. You're going to invest. So that's how I got into it. So for you, Joseline, you guys always knew you wanted to be in it. A lot of people who are online right now, they had a desire or a dream to be an investor. I got pulled into it. And because I'm a systems guy, I actually began to apply what I'd learned Now, actually, I went to a guy named Charles Givens. This is 1992, and we paid, my brother and I, $26,000 for all his workshops. And of the $26,000, it was $15,000 for a mentor who just showed up for 5 days only and taught us mostly US stuff. So we didn't learn a lot of Canadian things, but because I spent that kind of money, I was very committed. Now, I hear a lot of people say, you know, I was in a plane, I got into a car crash, fell off a boat, something just stopped me in my tracks to motivate me to do better. For me, I paid $26,000. And that was my motivation because I didn't want to lose my money, right? So unlike a lot of investors who had this great concept to begin with, or had a great motivation or a life-changing scenario, I didn't have any of that. My brother forced me into it. Since then, most likely I've probably bought about 45 houses, 27 or 28 commercial buildings from 6 units to about 64 units, built 240 houses, built a series of 3 and 4 story 50-unit condo buildings. And I've done business in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Arizona, Florida, and Belize. Now, when people hear my story, they say, wow, you've done a lot. You're probably a really smart guy. In a lot of cases, I've made a lot of mistakes. So, I mean, I was smart, but I wasn't that smart. And I was fortunate to have, along the way, some coaches to help me. But, you know, for most of my life, I wasn't married. And marriage is great. I didn't have kids, and that's great too. So if I made mistakes, detrimental mistakes, I can always put up the white flag of surrender and run back home if I had to. So a lot of people today are married, they have kids, they have a lot of responsibility. And so I honor them as being really brave because they have no choice but to be successful. So again, you know, that's my background. So today I'm going to talk a bit about, you know, retiring early. Now, basically from the time I started investing, really investing, I was like 24 and a half, 25 years old. I still needed 12 years in my main job before I can actually walk away from that job. So when people say to me, can I retire early? Well, think about this. Most people start working at 22, they retire around 67. That's like 45 years of work. So I can see that real estate can help somebody retire with 25% of that. So 12 years later, you can retire if you do it a certain way and then maintain your lifestyle on that portfolio. But it takes about 12 years to get there. Now, some of you are like, man, I hate my job. I don't want to go to my job one more day. Well, that's okay too, because it takes about 2 years on average to get away from your main job, but you still have to work for the next 10 years at least. So Joseline, you left your job. It was a great job, but you left it, but you're still a realtor and you're still an investor. And you still have to put another 10 years in to that 12-year mark to literally be able to say, okay, I have the option to retire. And people hate to hear me say that because they want me to say, yeah, in 2 years you can retire, finish, gone, do whatever you have to do. And maybe you're that special that you can do it, but I wasn't. And I've been doing this for over 30-something years, and I know a lot of people. You know, for about a decade, I traveled from BC all the way to Ontario, all the way throughout the US. I was teaching how to invest from 98, 99 to about 2007, 2008. I was teaching people rent to own, wholesaling, you know, what you call BRRRR today. People hadn't even heard of some of that stuff. And so I've taught over 35,000 people. And I got to tell you, for most of those people, it did take about 12 to 15 years to actually say, I'm done. I can walk away, relax on my property, and just survive. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, why is it important to stay working, whether you're in the job you like or don't like, or if you're able to leave that job and go somewhere else but continue to work? Because in most cases, you have to get financing. Now, yes, I know it's a possibility to do no money down. I get that. If you have the skill set, that's okay. You're able to most likely find a great deal. If you have a great realtor, or if you can find a deal off market, you have a deal. That helps you not having money. Somebody else can have the money. And I know at the same time, If you have the ability to finance a deal, then you're good. But the bottom line is, I needed those 12 years to refinance properties with at least a steady job. You know, I know some people who they'll hire a coach and then they'll quit their job 6 months later, and then now you can't refinance your property. So if you don't like your job, there are ways to get a job that you do like after a few years, but you still have to work for 10 years. At least that's something that you have to realize. Another thing too is it's an attitude. A lot of people love the idea of real estate and becoming financially free. But the problem is, people will say something like, if I can do it, you can do it too. And that's not true. Okay, it's unfortunate. If I can do it, or if he can do it, or if she can do it, it doesn't mean just anybody can do it too. Anybody can dream about it. Anybody can have a burning desire for it. Anybody can say to me, you know what, I always knew that this is the place I want to be. But if you're not going to put the work in, because there are usually 5 things you have to do. Line up the camera. It's 5 things you have to do. And it's, in most cases, one of those 5 things you're terrible at and you hate doing. And if you want to be successful in real estate, you have to do those 5 things, even the thing you hate to do. And some people will say to me, well, if you hate to do something, pay someone else to do it. But you still have to do it to begin with, in order to be able to pay someone to do it, to have an understanding of the value of it. I'll give you an example. There are a lot of people who hate talking to strangers. They hate making phone calls. Now, I'm 56 years old. I've been investing for over 30-something years. Now, okay, as of the time I turned 50, I could have retired, never had to work again. Unfortunately, I like to work, and I can't stand being on the beach for more than 5 days. I don't need a tan. I have one. So basically, I like being on the yacht, but after 5 days, I want off. So technically, although I'm 56, sure, I've retired, I still want to work. But keep in mind that there are things that I still have to do today, like still get on the phone and talk to property owners. And I say to myself, well, you know what? I deserve a break. Why do I have to do this 30 years later? Because some brand new students say to me, I don't want to make those phone calls. I'm like, who do you think you are? Like, are you entitled? I don't want to make them. You don't want to make them, but you have to make them. And those are the 5 things you have. That's one of the 5 things you have to do, and you may hate doing it. But to be successful in real estate, to get to retirement sooner, you got to do the things you hate to do. Some people say to me, well, you know what? You are outgoing. You do not fear public speaking. You like talking to people. So here's the secret. I'm a recluse. I probably talk to less people than every single one of you, period, in a week. If it's not business, I talk to my daughter. I talk to my parents, maybe a couple of friends. I'm not a person who speaks to a lot of people. I am a recluse. So you're saying, well, if he's a recluse, why is he doing a presentation? Because I have a good personality. That's it. And I have to develop it. So number one, you need to develop a personality if you don't have one, but I think you do, or else you wouldn't be on this webinar. And number two, you got to use that personality to actually make phone calls. So I was on a podcast a few months back, and I mentioned that to be successful in real estate, you have to be active, not passive. Meaning, if I'm driving from point A to point B, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm going to a meeting, I'm going to see somebody, I'm actively looking for real estate. And if I see potential, a property that looks as though it needs a bit of love, or maybe a property that I think I want to buy, it's not for sale, but I see the owner there, I will take action. I will stop my car, pull aside, pull into the driveway. I'll take a moment to put an envelope or a letter in the mailbox, or I might just knock and talk to the owner, which means I leave 30 minutes early for all my meetings. Instead of leaving at 10 o'clock for 11 o'clock, I leave at 9:30. I got 30 minutes to spot something good, and don't wait until I come back, actually go and do it. And I've behaved myself into that pattern, but over the last 30 years, I've found great deals just by stopping. Now, it's good to have a great realtor too, because if you don't want to leave a letter, or if you don't want to have that conversation, You call your realtor. And it's got to be a realtor like Joseline. Joseline, you're fearless. You will go and talk to anybody about anything. So you call your realtor and you say to your realtor, hey, there's a house on 1 King Street. I like that house. It's not for sale. Joseline, will you go and check it out for me? Now, I don't know if you would do it, but if you have the time, you would. And that's what you want to do. So even if I stopped and I did it, and I feel as though I need some help, I would then call a realtor, or I may do the deal myself. So it's a behavior that you have to do, and that's what causes success. So if someone does it and they're successful, doesn't mean you're going to be successful unless you actually try that. So it's very important to consider that. So I made a few notes. Now, the next thing is power team. People always say to me, well, if you have a great power team, you're going to be good when it comes to real estate investing. Every aspect of real estate has what's called a Charles Manson in the closet, meaning it's always something bad about the strategy or the thing that nobody talks about. So when they say get a great power team, they don't talk about certain aspects of the power team. So let me give you an example. So let's say that I'm thinking, should I incorporate a company before I buy my first property? That's pretty simple. Should I incorporate before I buy my first property? If I go to my accountant, just my regular accountant, that person might say, no, wait until your third house. Because you have to file every year. It's expensive to incorporate, a lot of paperwork, probably wait till your third house. If I talk to my tax accountant, that person might say, well, if you put it into a corporation, you're gonna get better tax breaks. And by the way, if you buy 3 houses in your name and you pay land transfer tax in Ontario, and you want to switch those houses to a corporation 3 years later, now you're going to pay land transfer tax again. So you see how it's opposing advice? And then my lawyer might say, yes, go ahead and get that corporation for liability protection because it separates you from the property and your personal stuff. But my mortgage agent might say to me, no, don't get a corporation because now to get a mortgage in a corporation, that's a lot of extra work and you might not get the same rates and there's a whole lot going on there. So right now you probably shouldn't get that. When I talk to my insurance person, they might say, no, because you might end up having to do corporate rates or something like that. When I talk to my realtor might say, well, that's not really my job. You got to talk to your tax accountant, you got to talk to your lawyer, you got to talk to your mortgage agent, you got to talk to your insurance agent, you got to talk to your accountant. So who the hell do I listen to when everybody's giving me all the weird advice in the world? And by the way, they're all right from their perspective. So it's great to have a power team, but you have to take leadership of that power team. But you can't do it if you don't have knowledge and wisdom and expertise. So if you're smart, it doesn't help. You have to have experience and you have to have wisdom. And that's where you want to bring in somebody who has walked the path that you've walked, maybe some kind of advisor or a coach who is not one of those great people. And then they can advise you on how it helps suit your needs because they're trying to help you, but it all depends on, well, what do you plan to do in 3 years? Are you planning to buy one house? Are you planning to go to multifamily? So it's a whole series of questions that have to be asked in order for them to be able to answer the question. So again, it just sounds simple, get a power team and that's great, but when you get advice from 15 different sides, you go crazy. So you have to get an advisor and that'll help you to get to retirement sooner. The next point is even if you bought a property and you want to renovate that property. So all of a sudden you have to figure out, I'm renovating the basement, and you talk to what's called the BCIN, or you talk to an architect. And sometimes they may be from Hamilton, but you're in Kitchener. And maybe they don't know the codes that well for Kitchener. Maybe they're not the same as Hamilton. At the same time, you have now somebody who doesn't know the people down at the bylaw office. So they don't know the little quirks or little weird things that certain bylaw officers focus on. So you get a smart guy from Hamilton to get you your drawings in Kitchener, and you paid good money for it. You did the right thing, but all of a sudden there's conflict and somebody forgets to tell you something. And then you're like, well, why don't you tell me that? Well, you don't know it because you don't know it. You don't have the experience. And after your first renovation, you're like, man, I feel as though I was doing all the work there. But these are all professionals. So that's what you have to understand. And then all of a sudden, when you bring in your trades, you have the HVAC guy, the heating system guy who thinks he's a king. Then you have the electrician who thinks they're most important. and you got the plumber who thinks they're most important. And they tend to want to fight each other because they're all God, and then everybody else is secondary. So yes, you can make money and you can retire on buying property, renovating the basement, but at the same time, you have to have somebody there who's gone through the experience, not just brain smart, because you might be a doctor, you might be a pilot, you might be an engineer. That makes you brain smart. But it doesn't mean that you're going to be a person who understands how to pull together these teams and manage them and who goes where and what goes where. So that's really important to consider when you're actually moving on your way towards retirement. Now, people always ask me, what plan should I use? Should I buy houses or should I get into buildings? Well, in my history, I ended up buying 3 or 4 houses, learning the understanding of multifamily, understanding of how to rent to more than one person, understanding of what a house requires to maintain it, because mathematically, cash flow looks good on paper. And if you're getting a cash flow of $500 a month, that's free and clear before taxes, that sounds pretty good. $1,000 a month sounds pretty good. But what if you have to replace the furnace? And that could be $6,000. And yes, it's your furnace, the value of your property goes up, but all of a sudden your cash flow is gone. That's why it's okay to have a job as well to pay some of those things. But ultimately, people generally buy 3 or 4 houses and then they max out. They can't borrow against those houses anymore. They tend to want to move up to commercial. And people say, well, what should I move up to in commercial? I generally say you should start off at a 6 unit. So a few houses, then a 6 unit. And from the 6 unit, you might want to go to a 12. And why is that? Well, with a 6 unit, you're able to do the work on it. You can't really afford a manager. So you want to at some point get to a 12 unit where you can afford a property manager to manage that property. And then from the 12 unit, you might get a series of 12s, or you might say to yourself, maybe I want to get into commercial real estate first and perhaps not the houses. But in that case, you know, Joseline, you do both residential and commercial. Very few realtors do both. And Joseline, you're great at finding off-market deals. And it's hard for realtors to do that. It's scary sometimes, making all those phone calls and getting rejection, right? So ultimately, if you want to go to the commercial first, again, you have to make sure you have that team member. So Joseline, what's your opinion of going back to the power team? Have you experienced advice from different experts that was counter?
Absolutely, Matthew. And I love the examples you're giving because that was my experience at one point. I think that what you said about people learning and growing themselves in order to lead this power team is very powerful. I can tell you a story. When I started real estate investing, we have this amazing real estate lawyer. He is great. We love him. He knows his job. He's been in this job for 30 years. I went to him and I said, I want to start investing in real estate. He said, no, don't do it. It's too risky. Or this, you could get sued. For him, his job is to protect me from being sued. That is literally his job. So the advice he's giving me is very sound from his perspective. Yes. But when it comes to investing and mitigating those risks, understanding my choices, I have to take charge and say, look, I really want to do this. You will advise me on how to avoid being in trouble, but we're doing it. And we've been doing it. He's still our lawyer, but because we know and we've invested in learning and growing, we've invested in coaching, we know the direction we want to take, and he's there to support me from a liability perspective.
And that's so important that we have to take charge of the experts that are in our circle, because ultimately we have to bounce their concepts off of where we are to see how it suits our needs. Each one is doing the best that they can do from their perspective, but in the end, they all get paid and we lose money if it doesn't work out right. Now, when it comes to the construction team, have you also seen that, these experts are supposed to know what they're talking about, but without your leadership, you sit back and you say to yourself, why did we do A or B or C? Why did we do A, F, and back to D?
Absolutely. And you know what, we've seen it with contractors. If you're doing your first transaction, contractors know if you know prices. If you don't know prices, they'll overcharge you. I've had contractors charge me like $30,000 to do a renovation. And I was like, break that down into labor and costs, right? Labor and material, break that down. And when they break down, you find that they're making more money than you potentially will make, right? So it's things like understanding, like learning and growing is very important. And obviously having somebody who can coach you through certain transactions. And this is also very true for realtors. I love what I do and I love my profession. And I know a lot of people do realtor, a lot of people love their jobs, but I'm telling you, there's a few percentage that have no clue what investing is. My bottom line, what I tell my clients is always work with people who are investors themselves. The reason I decided to get my license is because I literally could not find one really, really good agent. I know they are out there. I'm not saying there's no other good agents. There are good investment focused agents. But in my position at that time, I couldn't find one who could guide me, explain to me what I'm getting into. Things like even analyzing a deal, analyzing a transaction to tell me how much money I'm gonna make. That should be so easy. But I had this realtor who was telling me, look, you can do this yourself, save $500, you can do this yourself, therefore justifying the numbers. If somebody has to justify any numbers, those numbers don't work. Right. So that's where you have to take charge and know. In this case, I knew. I was like, look, if I'm doing something myself, I still have to pay myself for my time. So me doing something by myself, which I don't want to do because that's not my specialty. I want to hire a contractor and pay them fairly and still get the numbers that I'm looking for. So your point on learning and knowing what you're talking about, and also working with people who are investor focused. Don't take advice from somebody you wouldn't exchange your position with. Somebody has 0 properties and you're taking advice from them, likely that you'll end up with 0 properties as well.
No, it's so true. And I wrote down some of the excuses that contractors give you. Now, I'm not knocking contractors. There's a lot of great contractors out there. And being a contractor, sometimes you go through a lot of tough things, right? But generally, some of the excuses a contractor would give you is usually in this order. I wrote it down. If the job is not on time, they'll say to you, well, you know what, I underquoted you, and therefore that's why we're $20,000 over. Well, technically, if you're a leader, you shouldn't underquote me, because I could have chosen somebody else who can actually get the job done. Sometimes people underquote you just to get the job. The second thing they say is, I'm making no money here. I underquoted you, I'm making no money. They charge you $150,000, but they're making no money. Well, yeah, they are making some money. On that $150,000, they probably made over $110,000. So they are making money. The third thing they say is, you make too many changes. Now, it's true. Some property owners make way too many changes, and that's not good. But that's a third excuse to generally give you of why this property isn't being renovated the right way. The next is, I just couldn't find the supplies. We couldn't get the hardware, we couldn't get the sliding door, we couldn't get the, mind you, COVID did beat up the supply chain pretty good. The next excuse is usually, I just can't get a good plumber. I can't get a good drywaller. Or the drywaller got into a fight with his brother, and his brother's now off the job. So I really can't get the job done because of my staff. In every case, they blame somebody else. Or, I got too many jobs I'm doing right now. I'm doing 30 jobs. I can't get your job done. And lastly, they'll blame the weather. Like it was because so many floods in the area, or because of the storm, I can't get anything done. Keep in mind, all 7 of those could be real, but be prepared to deal with those by talking to them throughout the entire renovation of that lower unit to make sure that they don't hit you with this at the end, that they're dealing with it as you're going through the process. Now, the people say to me, well, what do you think about the BRRRR strategy? Is it a good strategy? So buy, renovate, you want to, obviously rent it out, refinance it, and repeat. Back in those days, we called it buy, fix, rent. A few years later, refinance and repeat. Now, these strategies are good strategies, but they are subject to certain seasons. And when I say a season, that season can be 10 years. For instance, right now, if you were to buy a house, you can get 2%. Is that true? As a mortgage. You can get a fee of 2%. Well, back in 2007, we were getting 5.7%. So it's very hard to BRRRR a property in 2007, when the interest rates were at 5.7%, a lot of your money was going towards paying the mortgage, okay? At the same time, the inventory was high back in those days, whereas right now the inventory is low. So BRRRR is working great because the interest rates are low, inventory is low, therefore demand is high, and therefore appreciation could be 15 or 16% year over year. So back in 2007, it was more like 5%. So could you BRRRR back in 2007? It wouldn't be the same thing. It would be like you're paying 5.7%, you're not making as much cash flow, you're only appreciating 5% a year because it's not as though there's heavy markets. People aren't moving from one city to another like they are now. At the same time, rents were a lot lower. Today, you can rent out a 2-bedroom, upper unit for between $2,200 and $2,800. You couldn't do that back in, let's say, 2000, from 1995 to 2007. And then appraisers back in those days were very strict. Even if you renovated your house, appraiser had a hard time saying, well, last year it was 500,000, this year it's 650. Had an issue saying that. So the BRRRR strategy works nicely now, and it'll work nicely as long as interest rates are low, there's low inventory, appreciation is high, that rents are good enough to make a good income coming in, and the property can get appraised. But if that is your only strategy, you cannot depend on that for every single season. Because I live or invest also in BC, and I invest in Alberta, I'm not experiencing 16% increases year over year, not in Edmonton. So therefore, I always say if you want to build wealth and get to retirement sooner than later, you have to understand which strategy is working right now. Don't wait, do it now. At the same time, make sure you have a strategy in reserve that works nicely when interest rates go up and when inventory becomes low, so you can sustain your wealth. And that's very, very important because too many investors that I know, they say BRRRR is it. That's it. I'm going to BRRRR for the rest of my life. Well, guess what? From 1992 to now, no, BRRRR was not working. It's working now. It may not work in the future. It's a great strategy. I love it. But you have to know something else as a backup as well. So keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to no money down, we always hear about no money down. Every property requires some money from somewhere to buy that property. Now, some people say, well, why don't you get vendor financing? Meaning, why doesn't the seller finance you fully? Well, I've experienced that when I bought a house in, I guess, Hamilton, and the owner had a specific problem or a situation, and he was able to give me 100% financing, but only for 1 year, and he did charge me 9%. After 1 year, I had to then find the ability to refinance that property. So if I went into no money down and got the seller to hold a mortgage for 1 year, but I had no way of getting refinanced 1 year later because I had no money to actually improve the property, or I had no way of kicking out that tenant in a nice way and fixing the unit, then yes, I got no money down, but 1 year later, I lose the house to power of sale. They'll take it back. So no money down is great, but you have to have a strategy, an exit strategy for solving whatever it took to get you no money down. It might be that I went to a private lender, and maybe I put down 20% and I couldn't go to a bank, but I went to a private lender and they give me 10% for the rest of the money. Well, they have to give me extra money in order for me to be able to improve that property so that a year from now I can refinance it and actually pay it out. So there are too many people who like the concept of no money down, but they don't think of the exit strategy, okay? So as long as you think of the exit strategy, you're gonna be okay. And start planning for that and do something concrete about it, or else you might catch yourself with 5 properties, all high mortgages, and no way to get yourself out of that. And I've come across a lot of students who've called me, like when I say students, just people who are investors, they call me and they say, Matthew, I need your help badly. I go, what's up? Well, I bought 3 houses and I only had 1 or 2 years to get the financing replaced, and I don't have the financing replaced. I'm about to lose these houses. What can I do? Now, I'm not a miracle worker. Obviously, I'm going to work with them to get that problem solved. It might be to sell something that they didn't want to sell. It might be to talk to their parents that they didn't want to talk to. It might be to be able to speak to other investors who may want to come on in with them. It might be to speak to their doctor or dentist or somebody who has access to money who may help them. And it might be just somebody who's older. Give an example. When I call people and I say to them, oh, hi, I was looking at your property. I like your property. I want to buy your property. Would you consider an offer? And they might say no. In fact, if I called 30 people, I'll get about probably 10 straight out saying to me, no, I'm not interested. And by the way, why will they be? It's not for sale. I'm calling them anyway. So they'll just straight out say, nope, not interested. Then I say, are you still growing? Are you still investing? If they say yes, I might say, well, let me know what you're looking for. In case I find it, I might have it on the contract. I may assign it to you. Who knows? And if they say not interested, I'll say, okay, just before I get off the phone, let me ask you a question. It sounds like you're comfortable as an investor. You seem like somebody that I want to be. If you don't mind me asking, what is it like to be at a point in your life where you have all the real estate you need, but not still grow? Because some people will say, well, I'm not really interested. And they might say, well, it feels good. And I'll say, but do you ever lose the bug? And you know what they tell me? These 45, 55, 65, 75-year-olds, they say to me, you never lose the bug. So you're 67 years old, you're not selling your property, you're not growing, but you didn't lose the bug. So what's holding you back? I'm too old. Hey, I'm not. Use my arms and legs. If you still want to invest, maybe we could do something together. But what I'm saying is that phone call started with, I want to buy your property. And they said, no. Are you still growing? No. Are you comfortable where you are real estate wise? Yes. Okay, let me ask you a question. How are you the way you are? I'd like to be like that. And if they say I still have the bug, in some cases I'll say I'd love to meet with you, get to know you better, because you can still invest with my arms and legs. And we can become partners. And sometimes they say, I don't want to get into real estate. I say, with all that equity you have, you might consider loaning money to someone like me. I'm looking to buy a house. And if you can do a short-term loan against your equity, then secured against the property I'm buying, it could be possible for me to be able to do a deal. You can obviously come look at it. You can still live vicariously through me, and your money is secured against that property. So you see how I've just turned a no into a potential yes? Joseline, what's your experience with that?
Yes, we do get a lot of no's and a lot of yeses, but I think a lot of the times, if you're bringing a solution, what I tell to a lot of my clients is, what value are you bringing to the table? If you're bringing people value, they will partner with you. There's a lot of opportunities for joint ventures. There's a lot of opportunities. What I find, even when you get to partner with somebody who's experienced like that, you get to learn from them. So absolutely, and I think this goes back to learning and just having something that you bring into the table. Because why would I partner with you unless you're bringing something to the table, which is basically what you're saying. Bring you're bringing, great availability, hard work, and somebody who doesn't want to do that would definitely give you what you want in exchange to what you bring to the table. 100%.
Well, sometimes with my students, they use me as leverage. You're a realtor. They can use your knowledge as leverage. But they might say, okay, I don't have 10 years of experience, but my associate, Mathew, he's got 30 years of experience. So they bring me to the table. And again, my experience is success and failure. I've done both. I probably would say I was right 60% of the time. I was wrong probably 40% of the time. But the 40% I was wrong, I thought I was going to be right. I kind of thought I knew it all at certain times. But as you get older, you realize, you know what, maybe you don't know it all. And I made a lot of my biggest mistakes, not as an amateur, but as an expert. So what happens is when you get bigger, you get invincible and you go right to the edge, and sometimes you go over the edge, because I know I can pull myself back from the precipice because I had that ability, but sometimes I didn't. So you have to watch out for that. But putting that aside, you can always borrow the leverage with your associate, your other investor, or your coach if they're out there in the field, and that can help you to get that credibility you want with that potential investor who can loan you money, who can finance a deal for you, who can live through you vicariously. And I think that's very important. And again, wholesaling is an important thing as well. So ultimately, if I were to start over again, when it comes to how do I get to retirement within about 12 years, personally, I would go right to the multifamily larger buildings, and I would partner with people who are bringing the money and bringing the knowledge. But I'd have to spend time with people who do that, whether they're friends or associates or a coach, in order to understand that. If I went the residential way, it definitely would be about 4 to 6 properties. Then I would go to the 6-plex, understand multifamily, then go to the 12 unit, and then probably join venture with other people. I don't do no money down with buildings. It's just too complicated. I'll give an example. There's a deal right now where it's $2.7 million. The owner says he'll hold a mortgage for $1.7 million if I bring $1 million to the table. So no financing required from the bank, and that's because it's a mixed-use building, meaning multifamily and retail, but some of the retail, 3 of them, are stores. Because, 3 of them are restaurants. And because they're restaurants, those were hard to finance, buildings with restaurants before COVID. Even now it's harder. So he has a desire to sell, and that's why he's going to hold the VTB for 5 years at 1.7 million, and he's saying 6%. I'm saying nope, 4.5%. So I can get that $1 million from a couple investor friends of mine, or some of the people I've spoken to said they don't want to sell, but they're still interested in growing. They can borrow against their equity and then perhaps even come on in on a deal with me. So I'm using their money down. So all these deals have to be, I hate the word creative, but you have to look at the person's situation and see what's important to them and bring in your partners, the people who said, no, they don't want to sell, but they still want to grow. And you come together with all those folk, and then you can do a deal, and you might only get 30% of that deal. And somebody else might end up owning 70% of it, but they used all their money. You found the deal, you packaged the deal, it's part of your deal. So you're not acting like a realtor without a license. You're on the deal, and now you have one. And once you have that one deal, now you have proof of life. Now you have proof of credibility. Then you'll find your second one and your third one a lot easier. So it's getting past the first large deal that creates the credibility. What's your thoughts on that, Joseline?
You're absolutely right. I find that a lot of the times you have to do at least 1 or 2. And what I've been telling people is a lot of the times when people think of real estate investing, they think of it as this like big abstract idea. But sometimes just doing one first deal at a time, right? You do the first deal, you build your credibility, and then you find a way to do the second deal. So you're absolutely right.
Now, some people say to me, well, I want to do the first deal myself. I want to do it all by myself. And that's possible. But if you're going to use that as a marquee deal, like a deal to showcase you, that's when you bring in an associate or you bring in someone who knows what they're doing so that you can use that deal as an example. Because some people like to do things by trial and error. And you might get it right. But if you do a bunch of wrong things, that doesn't look so attractive to the next person who's going to come in and give you money for your second or third deal. The biggest problem I had to learn when it comes to real estate is sharing. I did not want to co-own property with somebody else. I just wanted it all for me. I don't know why, but I had to get past that. Okay, maybe I don't get the whole thing. Maybe I get a part of it. Maybe I use this to grow my relationship, and in the future, I'll get my whole thing after. One last thing about vendor financing, which is a big part of no money down. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made in real estate investing also happens to be one of my biggest lessons. So that one I wouldn't avoid. People always say to me, do I have regrets? Yes, I do. They say to me, will you take things back if you could? Hell yeah, I will. Some people say to me, but you won't be who you are today if you didn't do some of those things. Well, guess what? I don't want to be who I am today for some of the things I had to go through. So yeah, you learn from everything, but still, there's certain lessons I didn't have to learn. I had to just listen to somebody else. But my first commercial building, I thought all it is big residential. The guy had a building, asking, I think, $790 for it. I got it for $680. I'm like, man, I brought him down a couple $100,000. I'm amazing. And then on top of it all, I put down $180, and he left a VTB, vendor financing, where it's an IOU, I owe you, for 7 years at 7%. Now, this is 2002, 2001. Now, seven years should have tipped me off right there. People give vendor take-back mortgages for 5 years, usually maximum, because for 5 years you can carry that for tax purposes. So 7, 8, 9 years is not so common. I didn't know that. That was a red flag that I didn't really know. And because I didn't go to the bank, I didn't get a phase 1 environmental. When my lawyer talked to me about a phase 1 environmental, I go, how much is that? He said, probably $3,000. And I'm like, I don't want to pay that. So I said, I don't think I need that. I think I got a stormwater management assessment, which cost me $1,000, which I hated anyway. But either way, I avoided what my lawyer told me. I bought the property. 7 years later, it was worth $1.25 million. I'm like, man, I bought it for $680. I got a VTB. I put down $180,000, and now it's $1.25 million. Now I'm going to refinance it, pull some money out. I went to the bank, did my phase 1, $300,000 worth of pollution on the property. That's why he gave me the VTB. He knew that no bank would have ever accepted this property. They would have commanded that I did a phase 1 environmental, and that's a test to see if there's oil on the property, oil drums, goes back 50 years to see if there's any pollution. They may even do certain tests on your property for phase 2 and phase 3. I didn't do it. So all of a sudden, I'm stuck now 7 years later. I can't refinance. I'm at 7%. I had to beg the guy not to foreclose on me and take over the property. I had to wait another 5 years before I could pay off the VTB. The good news is that property went to about 1.5 million, then to about 1.8 million. So I still succeeded. I also learned the complete remediation, phase 1, 2, 3, and even phase 4, if there is such a thing. I went through all that, learned a big lesson. But again, that's something that you have to watch out for, that when you're getting no money down, you're giving or taking something. There's something in the closet. You need to know what's in the closet. That's really important to consider. Joseline, your thought? And I know we have to do questions in a second, but your thought about that?
Yes, I think what I'm hearing from what you're saying is definitely do your due diligence and make sure that you understand what you're doing. I really like the idea of, like, if you're doing such a big deal like that, commercial property, work with someone who understands commercial properties. Could be a mentor, it could be a partner, or just even a real estate agent who really, really understands all those clauses, and they can hold your hand and take you through it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's so true. One point I missed is, in the past, you can buy a single family house, rent it out, and make some money with that. Today, you have to have a 2-family house to even really break even. Because prices in some cities went from $500,000 to $800,000 for a basic house in the last 3 years, like it went up $300,000. Today, it's even hard to make money with a main house and a basement. You might have to get a coach house or what's called a carriage house or a garden suite. And if you're building a little house out back, let's say it's 500 square feet, that can cost you, who knows, maybe about $120,000 to $150,000 for that third unit. Has to be a city that allows that. So Kitchener, Hamilton, London, Brantford, there are a number of cities who are allowing that, and each city has their own little rules. But you almost literally have to have a triplex now. So if you're looking to buy a property, if it's possible to find one with a backyard, or at least a lot size that is not just 36 by, let's say, 36 by 90, which are most lots are 36 by 90 feet, you might get a 36 by 135. And a 36 by 135 deep gives you that distance of 7.5 meters between your house and that, let's say, coach house. And you have to have the room on the side to be able to park one car. So a driveway, you can have a parking right beside it, but you have to have a laneway that goes into the back so you can park your 2 cars back there. Because if you have 3 spots, 3 houses or 3 living spaces, you got to have 3 parking spots. So it might be something to consider when you're talking to your realtor to see if you can get a little bit extra land to make that a 3rd unit. That could be a good resale value, and that could now make some good money for you. And because, you know, for years now, I've been looking at modular homes. It's possible to do modular, not just build from stick. People always ask me, should I build a coach house with a basement? I keep it simple. Slab on grade means slab on ground, no basement, and, you know, one level. If the area allows it, then you have to go through all the bylaws. But keep that in mind if you're looking to buy houses. Is it possible to put a house in the back? 36 by 135 deep can do that for you.
Absolutely. Matthew, I really love when you're here doing a webinar with us. I feel like there's always so much more that you can elaborate on. I wish we had 3 hours to do this, because I know each point that you touched on can be expanded to one webinar. So hopefully we'll do more of these in the future. I will just take a few minutes to answer some questions. We are live on social media as well. We're getting some questions come in. So if you're seeing me distracted a bit, it's because I'm reading those questions. If we can get to any of the questions tonight, what I'll do is I usually will call the people who ask the questions, and I follow up and answer those questions. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and I will look at them tonight. If we can't get to them only because we have 5 minutes, I will call you and answer those questions on a phone call.
And also make sure they have my email. So if they have a certain question, you know, email me. I can expand on anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll send out a recording with contact information. So we'll include your contact information as well as mine. I see there's a question about a recording. Yes, there'll be a recording sent out probably tomorrow morning, and maybe between tomorrow and the next 2 days. Sometimes it takes a minute to get the tech people to figure it out, but yes, we'll send a recording in the next 48 hours and with contact information for you and as well as myself. So one of the questions that I'm getting here, which I'm seeing repetitively, is this. For somebody who came here tonight hoping for a formula on how to retire early, do you have a formula for someone who's looking for a formula?
Well, here's the problem. There is no such thing as a formula. That person would have to contact you or contact me. There are a number of questions I have to ask that person. What is their credit scenario right now? What is their job scenario right now? Do they have savings? Do they have somebody out there who can help fund them? What is their experience in dealing with tenants? What is their experience in dealing with construction? You know, where do they want to be 5 years from now? So there's no such thing as a formula for success for retirement. Today is more to say, hey, maybe Joseline, maybe Matthew knows what they're talking about. Maybe these are some people we should talk to and get some personal one-on-one for that. There is no formula for somebody. They have to give us a call. And I also have to understand the person's gifts. Can they communicate? Are they very shy? Right? We need to understand all that.
Yeah.
And all that is not an issue. We can solve those problems, but the formula is subject to each person. There's no such thing as one size fits all as a formula. But if you've enjoyed some of the things that we've said tonight, I definitely will spend the time, and Joseline will spend the time with you to ask you some personal, but doesn't have to be accurate, just questions so we can gear which direction you should go in.
Absolutely. And I think to add on that, one of the most important questions also is how much money that would cover your expenses. If let's say you need $3,000 a month versus somebody who needs $30,000 a month to cover their own expenses, like those would be different questions and definitely different factors that are going into the answer.
No, it's very true, because if you have a house and you're producing $500 a month, well, 5 times 12 is 6,000. You need 12 houses to get you 6,000 a month. You might get a commercial building that's maybe for 2 million, getting some investors to help you with that. Maybe that generates 2,000 a month or 3,000 a month. 2 of those might get you there. It all depends on personal situation.
Totally. The next question I have here is, what's a good return on investment? How much, for me, I think I'll start with like from a cash flow perspective. How much are you getting on average on a property? It could be per unit, or even if you have like residential properties, what's good cash flow? I think that's what the question is trying to get to. And maybe part B would be, sorry, I'll just finish. Part B would be, what's a good return on investment?
Well, a lot of it depends on where else can you get a return, right? In other words, if you buried your money, you lose 2%. If you put it in the bank, you get 1%. In a GIC, maybe you get 2 or 3%. Mutual fund, maybe you get 4 or 5%. Stock market, average, maybe you get 6, 7, 8%. If you loan your money out, you might get 10 to 14%. If you invested in real estate, you might end up getting a 10 to 16% return. But you have to combine that with, you're not just getting cash flow, you're getting mortgage pay down, and you're getting appreciation. So cash flow, cash on cash in your pocket, if you're making better than a GIC and better than a mutual fund, if you're doing 7 or 8%, that won't make you rich, but it's better than doing certain things that you cannot touch and feel. Whereas real estate, you can touch and feel. You're not just getting 7%, but you're getting mortgage pay down and you're getting appreciation. But those two, mortgage pay down, appreciation, you don't realize the benefit of those until you actually use it, till you borrow against it. People say to me, what cash flow? Well, for me, if I spend $1 million, I want to see a cash flow of about $800 a month, if possible. $800 doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a start. And it means that I'm also considering my mortgage pay down and my appreciation on top of that.
Yeah, and I like that. I think those are realistic numbers to get, like looking where the market is. If you spend $1 million, I think 800 is very realistic. Sometimes if it's a good deal, you could even get more. So I like that. Yeah.
And if you do something like Airbnb, obviously that's a different story. Yeah. When things are opened up, right?
Oh,
but that's a business you're running, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's exactly 7 o'clock, Matthew. Just to respect your time and everyone's time, we'll end it here. But thank you very much for being here. I say this all the time. Every time I spend an hour with you, I learn something new that I can apply to my real estate investing career. So thank you very much for being here tonight. I also would like to thank everyone who's been here throughout the whole hour. Thank you very much for showing up on time and obviously staying for the whole hour. We will be in touch. As I said, we'll send a recording. If you have any questions, you can always reach out and we'll be happy to connect with you. Thank you. Matthew, did you have something to say?
No, just thank you. And people always say, when do you start? Start now. If people started 10 years ago, prices would have been different. So start now, act now, and build it into your lifestyle. From point A to B, stop, make that connection, make that conversation happen. Great things will happen that way.
I agree 100%. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Okay, take care.
Bye.